The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another rut in the dusty road, jolting Penelope Taylor awake from her fitful sleep. She instinctively reached beside her, fingers closing around the leather handle of her trunk, the only possession that mattered anymore. Inside lay carefully folded silk and lace, a wedding dress she'd never worn, a promise unfulfilled. The year was 1876, and the Montana Territory stretched before her like an endless sea of grass and uncertainty. 3 weeks had passed since she'd buried her fiancé Daniel back in Boston. 3 weeks since typhoid fever had stolen her future, leaving her with nothing but a dress made for a day that would never come and a letter from her aunt inviting her to start anew in the West. White Rock Station coming up, the driver called from above. 10 minutes, folks. Penelope straightened her travel-worn skirts and tried to smooth her auburn hair. At 22, she had already known love and loss, leaving behind the comforts of Boston society for this wild frontier. Her aunt's letter had promised that White Rock needed teachers, and teaching was something Penelope knew how to do. Perhaps here, in this untamed place, she could find purpose again. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before a weathered wooden building with White Rock Station painted in faded letters across its front. A small gathering of buildings, a general store, what appeared to be a saloon, and scattered houses comprised what passed for a town. "Miss, need help with that trunk?" The driver's weathered face appeared at the door as he offered his hand. "Thank you, but I can manage." Penelope stepped down carefully, her boots touching Montana soil for the first time. She turned back to retrieve her trunk, determined not to let it out of her sight. "That's a mighty heavy load for a lady your size," the driver observed, already moving to help despite her protest. "It's very precious to me." She maintained her grip on one handle while allowing him to take the other. As they set the trunk down on the wooden platform, a deep voice called from across the street. "Hank, that the monthly mail you're bringing?" Penelope turned to see a man striding toward them. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of someone at home in his surroundings. Dust covered his worn leather boots and denim pants. His dark hair peeked out from beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. "Sure is, Ross. Got your supplies, too," Hank called back. "And a passenger. This here's Miss Penelope Taylor," she supplied, extending a gloved hand. Ross O'Brien tipped his hat before taking her hand briefly. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her with curiosity. "Welcome to White Rock, Miss Taylor. You planning to stay or just passing through?" "Staying, if all goes well. My aunt is Margaret Winters. I believe she runs the boarding house here." Recognition flickered across his face. "Mrs. Winters, sure. Her place is just up the road." "You're her niece from back east, then? She mentioned you might be coming." Penelope nodded, relief washing over her. "Yes, she wrote offering me a position at the school." Ross's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his features. "I'm afraid you've had a long journey for nothing, Miss Taylor. The school position was filled 2 weeks ago when nobody had heard from you." Her heart sank. "I see. I suppose my response letter didn't arrive in time. Mail's unreliable out here," he said simply. Then, noticing her distress, added, "But your aunt will still be mighty glad to see you. And White Rock always needs good folks. Something will turn up." As Hank unloaded the remaining luggage and mail, Ross reached for Penelope's trunk. "Let me carry this for you. Mrs. Winters' place is just up the hill." She hesitated, reluctant to relinquish her precious cargo. "I promise to be careful with it," he said, misinterpreting her concern. "Whatever's inside won't get damaged." "It's a wedding dress," she found herself saying, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "My wedding dress." His eyes widened slightly, then traveled to her bare left hand. Understanding dawned in his expression, but to his credit, he asked no questions. "All the more reason to handle it with care, then," he said quietly, lifting the trunk with ease. They walked in silence up the dusty street, Penelope acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but a young, unmarried woman was something of a rarity in frontier towns. "Your aunt's place," Ross announced as they approached a 2-story white clapboard house with green shutters. A neat sign reading, "Winters Boarding House," hung by the front door. Before they reached the steps, the door flew open and a plump woman with graying hair hurried out. "Penny, Oh my goodness, you've finally arrived. Margaret Winters enveloped her niece in a warm embrace that smelled of baking bread and lavender water. Penelope found herself fighting tears as she returned the hug, suddenly overwhelmed by the journey and all that had happened. "Let me look at you," her aunt said, holding her at arm's length. "Thin as a rail, but we'll fix that soon enough. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted." Ross cleared his throat. "I'll just bring this inside for you, Mrs. Winters." "Ross O'Brien, you're a saint," Margaret beamed at him. "Put it in the blue room upstairs. I've had it ready for weeks." As they entered the tidy parlor, Penelope was struck by how homey it felt despite its frontier simplicity. Braided rugs covered the wooden floors, and curtains of cheerful yellow gingham framed the windows. The furniture was sturdy rather than fashionable, but everything was spotlessly clean. "Ross runs the cattle ranch north of town," her aunt explained as the cowboy carried the trunk upstairs. "One of the few decent men around here who isn't already married or ancient." "Aunt Margaret." Penelope felt her cheeks warming. "Just stating facts, dear." Her aunt's eyes twinkled. "Now, let's get you settled. I've made up the nicest room with a view of the mountains." The blue room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt and a washstand with a porcelain basin. A small desk sat beneath the window that indeed offered a spectacular view of distant mountains. Ross placed the trunk carefully at the foot of the bed. "There you are, Miss Taylor. Safe and sound." "Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. You've been very kind." He lingered at the doorway, seeming to want to say something more. Instead, he simply nodded. "If you need anything while you're getting settled, folks around here are generally helpful. Mrs. Winters knows where to find me." After he left, Margaret sat beside Penelope on the bed. "Now then, tell me everything. Your letter said only that Daniel had passed, and you needed to come west. What happened, dear?" The gentle question broke the dam Penelope had built around her emotions. Words poured out as she described the fever that had taken Daniel so quickly, the plans they'd made, the dress she'd never wear, and the future that had vanished. "We were to be married in June," she finished, wiping her eyes. "The dress was finished just 3 days before he fell ill. He never even saw it." Margaret took her hands. "You've been through a terrible ordeal, my dear. But you're here now, and you can heal. There's something about this country, the open spaces and fresh air have a way of mending broken hearts." "I had hoped to teach," Penelope said, remembering Ross's words. "But Mr. O'Brien mentioned the position has been filled." "Yes, unfortunately. Sarah Landry arrived from Minnesota last month. But there are other opportunities, Penny. In fact," her aunt paused, considering. "The ranch where Ross works needs someone to teach the foreman's children and a few others from neighboring properties. It's not a proper school, but it would be teaching nonetheless. On a cattle ranch." Penelope couldn't hide her surprise. "The West isn't Boston, dear. We make do with what we have. The Rocking O is one of the largest operations around here. They've built a small schoolhouse for the children of the workers. 5 or 6 pupils, I believe." Penelope considered this unexpected possibility. Teaching at a ranch wasn't what she'd envisioned, but it was teaching nonetheless. "I'll speak to Ross about it tomorrow," Margaret continued. "For now, you should rest. Dinner's at 6, and you can meet the other boarders then." Left alone, Penelope unpacked her few belongings, carefully avoiding the trunk for as long as possible. Finally, she knelt beside it, running her fingers over the brass latches before slowly opening the lid. Wrapped in layers of tissue lay the ivory silk gown with its delicate lace overlay and tiny pearl buttons. She lifted it slightly, the fabric rustling with memories of a future that would never be. Gently, she replaced it and closed the trunk, unsure why she'd brought it except that leaving it behind would have been like abandoning the last piece of her heart. That evening, Penelope met the other boarders: Mr. Hobson, the telegraph operator; Mrs. Fletcher, a widow who helped at the general store; and Mr. Parrish, a land surveyor working for the railroad. They were kind but curious, asking polite questions about Boston while carefully avoiding any mention of why a young woman would travel alone to such a remote place. 3 days later, Ross O'Brien returned to town. Penelope was helping her aunt in the vegetable garden when she heard the distinctive sound of horses' hooves on the packed dirt road. "Miss Taylor," he called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Mrs. Winters." "Mr. O'Brien," Penelope acknowledged, brushing soil from her hands. I spoke with Mr. Blackwood at the Rocking O, he said without preamble. He's interested in meeting you about the teaching position, if you're still looking for work. Her aunt shot her a meaningful glance. What did I tell you, Penny? An opportunity already. When would Mr. Blackwood like to meet? Penelope asked. Today, if possible. I can take you out there now and bring you back before dark. Seeing her hesitation, he added, Mrs. Winters is welcome to join us, of course. Oh, I can't possibly leave the house today, her aunt said quickly. Mrs. Parrish is arriving on the afternoon stage. But Penny is perfectly capable of making her own decisions. She patted Penelope's arm. Go change, dear. You can't meet your potential employer in a gardening apron. 20 minutes later, wearing her second-best dress, a practical navy blue with minimal trimmings, Penelope found herself seated beside Ross O'Brien in his wagon, heading north out of town. I should warn you, Ross said as they traveled. The Rocking O isn't what you might expect if you're used to Eastern refinement. It's a working ranch, rough around the edges. I appreciate your concern, Mr. O'Brien, but I'm not as delicate as I might appear. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Never said you were delicate, Miss Taylor. Just different. This country changes people sometimes for better, sometimes not. And how has it changed you? She asked, surprised by her own boldness. He considered this for a moment. Made me self-reliant. Out here, a man's word and his work define him, not his family name or his bank account. That sounds rather refreshing, actually, she admitted. As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view in the valley below, a collection of buildings centered around a large two-story house. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and in the distance, riders moved among the herds. Home sweet home, Ross said, a note of pride in his voice. 3,000 acres and nearly 2,000 head of cattle. It's impressive, Penelope acknowledged, taking in the scale of the operation. You've been here long? 7 years. Came out from Pennsylvania with nothing but the clothes on my back and a decent knowledge of cattle. Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman, and now I manage the whole operation for Mr. Blackwood. She glanced at him with new respect. That's quite an accomplishment. Just hard work and fair dealing, he said with a shrug, but she could tell he was pleased by her recognition. As they approached the main house, a man emerged onto the porch. Tall and distinguished with a silver-streaked beard, he watched their approach with interest. That's Vernon Blackwood, the owner, Ross explained. He's a good man. Fair employer. He lives in Helena most of the time, but he's here this week to see how the spring calving went. The meeting with Mr. Blackwood went better than Penelope could have hoped. The schoolroom turned out to be a converted bunkhouse, simple but serviceable, with handcrafted desks and a small blackboard. 6 children between the ages of 6 and 12 needed education, the foreman's 3 children and 3 from neighboring ranches. Can you start next week? Mr. Blackwood asked after discussing salary and arrangements. We've got quarters for you in the main house, simple, but private. Penelope hesitated. I'm currently staying with my aunt in town. Miss Taylor could ride out with me each day, Ross interjected. At least until she's sure the position suits her. It's only 5 miles. Mr. Blackwood raised an eyebrow, but nodded. That would work too. Whatever makes you comfortable, Miss Taylor. Thank you, she said, grateful for the compromise. I would like to begin next Monday, if that's acceptable. On the ride back to town, Penelope found herself studying Ross's profile as he handled the wagon. There was something reassuring about his steady presence. Thank you for suggesting the daily travel arrangement, she said. I'm not quite ready to leave my aunt's home. Figured as much, he replied. It's a big change, coming from a city to a place like this. Best to ease into it. You seem to understand a great deal about adaptation, Mr. O'Brien. Ross, he corrected. If we're going to be sharing a wagon ride 10 times a week, might as well use first names. Very well. Ross. Then I'm Penelope, though most call me Penny. Penelope suits you better, he decided. More dignified. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. May I ask you something personal, Penelope? He finally said. She tensed slightly. You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough. He adjusted the reins in his hands. That wedding dress in your trunk, were you married before? The direct question caught her off guard, but somehow it was easier to discuss with this straightforward cowboy than it had been with anyone else. No, she said softly. I was engaged. Daniel died of typhoid 3 weeks before our wedding. The dress was already finished. Ross nodded slowly. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. She waited for the usual platitudes that followed about time healing all wounds or Daniel being in a better place, but they didn't come. Instead, Ross simply said, must have been hard to bring it with you, but harder to leave it behind. The simple understanding in his words touched her deeply. Yes, exactly. I couldn't bear to abandon it, even though I'll never wear it now. He was quiet for a moment before saying, keep it. Wear it when you're ready again. The statement wasn't a question or even really advice, just a gentle acknowledgement that someday her heart might heal enough to contemplate happiness again. Something about his matter-of-fact tone made the suggestion feel like permission rather than pressure. I don't know if that day will ever come, she admitted. Maybe, maybe not. But out here, we've learned not to throw away useful things just because they're not needed right now. Penelope couldn't help but smile at his practical approach. Is that frontier wisdom, Mr. O'Ross? Just common sense, he replied with a shrug. Winters are long and supplies are scarce. The following Monday, Penelope began her teaching position at the Rocking O Ranch. True to his word, Ross arrived promptly at 7 each morning to drive her to the ranch and returned her to town each afternoon by 5. The children, though wilder than her Boston pupils, had been proved eager to learn, and Penelope found herself enjoying the challenge of adapting her teaching methods to their frontier upbringing. As the weeks passed, her morning rides with Ross became something she looked forward to. Unlike many men she'd known, he didn't feel compelled to fill silence with chatter. When he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often surprisingly insightful. One morning in late April, as they traveled beneath a canopy of cottonwoods just coming into leaf, Ross pointed to a hawk circling overhead. Red-tailed, he said. They mate for life. Lost his partner last year to a hunter's stray shot. Been watching him fly these same circles ever since, like he's still looking for her. Penelope felt a pang of recognition in the bird's solitary flight. That's terribly sad. Nature's way, Ross replied. But I've noticed recently he's flying with another hawk sometimes. Took him almost a year, but he's finding his way forward. She glanced at him, wondering if there was a message intended for her in the observation, but his expression revealed nothing beyond casual interest in the bird's behavior. On a Friday in early May, Penelope finished her lessons early. The children had been restless with the coming of spring, so she'd taken them outside for a nature study, identifying wildflowers and discussing their properties. Not expecting Ross for another hour, she wandered toward the corral where several cowboys were breaking a spirited young horse. She watched from a distance, admiring their skill as they worked with the nervous animal. Not what you're used to seeing in Boston, I'd wager. She turned to find Ross beside her, his sleeves rolled up and hat pushed back, revealing that he'd been working hard at something. No, certainly not, she agreed. Though I did ride occasionally in the city parks. English saddle, I presume? Side saddle. She nodded. Is there another way for a lady to ride? A smile tugged at his lips. Out here? Absolutely. Most women who work ranches ride astride. Hard to round up cattle from a side saddle. I suppose that makes sense, she conceded. Though I can't imagine it's very comfortable in skirts. Some wear split skirts or even pants under a long coat. Seeing her scandalized expression, he laughed. Frontier practicality trumps Eastern propriety out here, Penelope. So I'm learning. She watched the horse prance nervously as a young cowboy approached with a saddle. He seems frightened. Ross corrected. And yes, she's never been ridden before. This is all new to her. They watched as the cowboys worked patiently with the mare, speaking softly and moving slowly around her until she allowed the saddle to be placed on her back. They're gentler than I expected, Penelope observed. A good horseman doesn't break a horse's spirit, he teaches it to work with him. Ross leaned against the fence. Violence and fear might get quick results, but they make for a skittish, untrustworthy mount. Patience and consistency build trust. Something about his words resonated with her on a deeper level. Is that true of people as well? His blue eyes met hers. I believe so. Can't rush healing or trust. They come in their own time, if the conditions are right. A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued watching the training session. After a while, Ross checked his pocket watch. We should head back if you want to be in town for supper, he said. Actually, Penelope found herself saying, Mrs. Carmichael invited me to stay for the ranch dinner tonight. She's making apple pie. Ross raised an eyebrow. And you're considering it? You usually hurry back to town. I thought. Perhaps it's time I got to know the ranch better. If you don't mind waiting, that is. I don't mind at all, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. In fact, I'd be honored to have you join us. That dinner marked a turning point. Penelope found herself drawn into the ranch community, fascinated by the stories shared around the long table. The Cowboys, initially reserved in her presence, gradually opened up, treating her with a mixture of respect and teasing familiarity that she found surprisingly pleasant. Through May and into June, she began staying for dinner 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes, if the weather was fine, Ross would take her on a short ride around the property afterward, pointing out landmarks and telling her the history of the land. On one such evening in mid-June, they rode to a high ridge overlooking the entire valley. The setting sun painted the landscape in brilliant golds and purples, casting long shadows across the rolling grasslands. It's breathtaking, Penelope said, drinking in the vista. This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch, Ross admitted. I come here to think sometimes. What do you think about? She asked, turning to study his profile. He considered the question seriously. The future, mostly. What I want to build here. You speak as though the ranch is yours, she observed. Not yet, he said quietly. But someday. Blackwoods offered to sell me a parcel 200 acres on the north end. I've been saving every penny. By next spring, I should have enough for a down payment. Penelope felt a surge of admiration. Your own ranch? That's wonderful, Ross. It's just a start. A man needs something of his own out here. He looked at her directly. Something worth working for, worth protecting. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. Over the past months, she'd come to value his friendship deeply, but lately, she'd caught herself thinking of him at odd moments, wondering what he would say about something she'd read or looking forward to sharing news with him. I hope you achieve that dream, she said sincerely. You deserve it. The moment lingered between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Ross cleared his throat and turned his horse back toward the trail. We should head back before it gets dark, he said. The trail gets tricky in poor light. 2 weeks later, disaster struck the Rocking O. A sudden summer storm with lightning sparked a prairie fire that threatened the north pastures where the new calves were grazing. Every hand on the ranch worked through the night to control the blaze and move the cattle to safety. Penelope, who had been teaching when the alarm sounded, found herself pressed into service alongside the ranch women, preparing food and bandaging burns as the men staggered in from the fire line. Where's Ross? She asked Mrs. Carmichael as dawn broke with no sign of him. The cook's wife shook her head. Still out there with the last group. They're trying to save the herd that got cut off by the fire. Fear gripped Penelope as she imagined him facing walls of flame. She busied herself making fresh coffee and preparing bandages, watching anxiously for any sign of the missing men. Finally, around mid-morning, riders appeared on the horizon. As they drew closer, Penelope counted frantically, her heart sinking when she realized there were only 5 men returning when 6 had gone out. She ran toward them as they dismounted, searching for Ross's familiar figure. Relief washed over her when she spotted him, though he was slumped in his saddle, his face blackened with soot. Ross, she called, reaching for his horse's bridle. He looked down at her with exhausted eyes. Penelope, what are you still doing here? Helping, she said simply. Are you hurt? Before he could answer, he swayed dangerously in the saddle. 2 cowboys moved quickly to help him down, revealing an ugly burn along his right arm where his sleeve had been charred away. Get him to the house, Mrs. Carmichael ordered. Miss Taylor, bring those bandages and the burn salve. Penelope worked alongside Mrs. Carmichael, cleaning and bandaging Ross's arm while he sat stoically, refusing laudanum despite the obvious pain. What happened? She asked as she carefully applied salve to the angry red flesh. Barn caught fire, he said through gritted teeth. Had to get the horses out. And Jenkins? Mrs. Carmichael asked, referring to the young cowboy who hadn't returned. Ross's expression darkened. Roof collapsed. We couldn't reach him in time. The news cast a pall over the ranch. When Penelope finished bandaging Ross's arm, Mrs. Carmichael insisted he rest, practically forcing him into a bedroom off the main house. I'll sit with him, Penelope volunteered, seeing the older woman's exhaustion. You've been up all night too. Left alone with Ross, Penelope took the chair beside his bed, watching as he fought against sleep. You should rest, she said softly. Can't, he muttered. Too much to do. The cattle, the others are handling it, she assured him. You've done enough. He closed his eyes briefly, then forced them open again. Jenkins was just a kid. 19. I should have checked the barn roof sooner. It wasn't your fault, she said firmly, placing her hand over his uninjured one. From what I've heard, you saved at least a dozen horses and 3 men. Not enough? He whispered, the weight of responsibility heavy in his voice. Without thinking, Penelope reached out to smooth his hair back from his forehead. Rest now, Ross. Please. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the gentle touch, but his resistance finally crumbled. His eyes drifted shut, and his breathing gradually slowed and deepened. Penelope remained at his side, her hand in his, watching the strong lines of his face relax and sleep. Something had shifted between them during this crisis, a recognition of feelings that had been growing quietly for months. The realization startled her. When had this capable, straightforward cowboy become so important to her? When had his smile become something she looked forward to each morning? When had his opinion started to matter more than anyone else's? And most importantly, was she betraying Daniel by feeling this way? The question haunted her as she rode back to town late that afternoon, having been relieved by Mrs. Carmichael once Ross was sleeping soundly. Her aunt was waiting anxiously on the porch. Thank heavens you're safe. We've been hearing about the fire all day. It was terrible, Penelope confirmed, allowing Margaret to usher her inside. A young cowboy died, and many others were injured. Ross was burned trying to save the horses. Ross, is it? Her aunt noted with raised eyebrows. No longer Mr. O'Brien? Penelope flushed. We've been working together for months now, Aunt Margaret. Indeed you have. Her aunt studied her face. And judging by your expression when you say his name, you've developed feelings for the man. I don't know, Penelope admitted. It feels disloyal somehow. Margaret took her niece's hands. Daniel would not want you to mourn forever, dear. He loved you. He would want you to be happy again. But it's only been 7 months, Penelope protested. The heart knows no proper timeline for healing, her aunt said gently. Some grieve for years, others find new love quickly. There's no right or wrong way, only what feels true to you. That night, Penelope opened her trunk for the first time in weeks. The wedding dress lay just as she'd left it, beautiful and untouched. Daniel had been loving and generous in life. Surely he would want the same for her in death. Ross recovered quickly from his burns, though the loss of young Jenkins weighed heavily on him. The ranch held a small funeral service, and Ross insisted on riding to Denver personally to deliver the boy's belongings and savings to his mother. When he returned a week later, Penelope noticed a new solemnity in him. Are you all right? She asked as they rode back from the ranch one evening. Getting there, he said. Jenkins' mother was grateful to hear he died bravely. Said he'd written to her about the ranch, about how much he was learning. He paused. Made me realize how quickly life can change. How important it is to speak your truth while you have the chance. There was something in his tone that made Penelope's pulse quicken. What truth is that? Ross pulled the wagon to a stop on a small rise overlooking the town below. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, bathing everything in golden light. I've grown very fond of you, Penelope Taylor, he said quietly, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. More than fond, if I'm being honest. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to our conversations, admiring your spirit and your kindness. She felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. Ross, you don't need to say anything, he continued. I know you're still healing. I know there's a wedding dress in your trunk meant for another man. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I just wanted you to know how I feel, because life is uncertain, and some words shouldn't go unspoken. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. I've been so confused about what I'm feeling, she admitted. When I saw you return from the fire, hurt but alive, something changed in me. I realized how important you've become to me. Hope flickered in his expression. Important enough to consider a future? Someday, perhaps, when you're ready. I think so, she whispered. But I need time, Ross. My heart is still healing. He nodded, reaching for her hand. Time is something I can give you, Penelope. I'm not going anywhere. As summer turned to fall, Penelope and Ross's relationship deepened. He began calling at the boarding house on Sundays to take her on rides or picnics in the countryside. Sometimes they simply sat on her aunt's porch, talking about books or their childhoods or their dreams for the future. By October, Penelope had moved permanently to the ranch, taking a small cabin near the schoolhouse that had previously belonged to the foreman's family before they built a larger home. The arrangement gave her independence while keeping her close to her teaching duties and to Ross. On a crisp November evening, Ross invited her to ride up to his ridge, as she now thought of it. The air was cold but clear, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I've got news, he said as they dismounted. Blackwood agreed to my offer. The north section will be mine after the new year. Ross, that's wonderful, Penelope exclaimed. Your own land at last. 200 acres, he said, pride evident in his voice. Good water, decent grazing. Room to build something real. You'll be an excellent rancher, she said sincerely. The best in the territory, I'd wager. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. I'll need help, though. Running a ranch isn't a one-person job. Her heart began to race as she recognized the seriousness in his expression. What kind of help did you have in mind? The permanent kind, he said softly. Penelope Taylor, I love you. I have for months now. I want to build a life with you, a home, a family, a future. Would you consider becoming my wife? Though she'd begun to anticipate this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. In her mind, she saw the trunk at the foot of her bed, the dress inside it still waiting. Ross, she began, then faltered. Understanding crossed his features. You're not ready. No, that's not, she squeezed his hands. I love you too, Ross. I do. But there's something I need to resolve first. He nodded slowly. The wedding dress. Yes. Tears filled her eyes. I need to make peace with my past before I can fully embrace our future. Can you understand that? Of course I can, he said gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. Take whatever time you need, Penelope. I'll be here. The next day, Penelope asked Ross to take her into town. While he attended to business at the general store, she went to see her aunt. I need your help with something, she said after explaining Ross's proposal and her hesitation. The wedding dress, I can't keep it, but I can't simply discard it either. Margaret considered this. What about Mrs. Landry's daughter? She's about your size, and they certainly couldn't afford such a fine dress for her wedding next spring. That's perfect, Penelope said, relief washing over her. A new beginning for the dress, just as I'm seeking a new beginning for myself. That evening, she carefully removed the dress from her trunk. Memories flooded back as she held it, dreams of a different life, a different future. But as she folded it into a box for Sarah Landry, she felt not grief but a gentle acceptance. Daniel would always be part of her past, but her future belonged to her and, she hoped, to Ross. The following Sunday, Ross called for her as usual. Instead of suggesting a ride, however, Penelope invited him into her small cabin. I have something to show you, she said, leading him to where her trunk stood open by the bed. It's empty now. He looked from the trunk to her face, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've let it go? I gave the dress to Sarah Landry for her wedding, Penelope explained. It deserved to be worn, to be part of someone's joy. And she took a deep breath. I'm ready now, Ross. Ready to look forward instead of back. Ready to build that future you spoke of. Joy spread across his features. Are you saying yes? I'm saying yes, she confirmed, stepping into his arms. Yes to you. Yes to us. Yes to everything we can create together. Their wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1877, in the parlor of Margaret's boarding house. Penelope wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, with white lace at the collar and cuffs new, like the life she was beginning. Ross, handsome in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows before the small gathering of friends who had become their frontier family. I never thought I'd find love again, Penelope whispered as they shared their first dance. Thank you for your patience, for giving me time to heal. Thank you for trusting me with your heart, he replied, holding her close. I promise to honor that trust every day. Spring brought new beginnings as they moved into the small house Ross had built on his land. It was simple but solid, with large windows that looked out over rolling grasslands and distant mountains. A small garden plot waited for Penelope's touch, and Ross had planted saplings that would one day provide shade for children to play under. As they stood on the porch of their new home, arms around each other, Penelope thought of the empty trunk now serving as a blanket chest in their bedroom. It had once held a dress meant for a different future, but now it contained quilts and linens for the life they were building together, a reminder that even the deepest sorrow could, in time, give way to joy. Happy? Ross asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Completely, she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. And I have news that will make you even happier. His eyes widened as she took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. A baby, he whispered, awe and delight spreading across his features. Are you certain? The doctor confirmed it yesterday, she said, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. Careful, there's precious cargo aboard now. He set her down gently, his hand still cradling her face. I love you, Penelope O'Brien, more than I ever thought possible. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting their new home in golden light, Penelope knew she had finally found where she belonged. Not in the refined parlors of Boston, but here on the frontier, with this good man and the life they were creating together, a life built on patience, understanding, and a love that had given her the courage to begin again. The wedding dress that had traveled so far in her trunk had found its purpose in making another bride's dreams come true. And Penelope had found that Ross had been right all along. There was indeed a time to wear it again, not the same dress perhaps, but the promise it represented, love, commitment, and the courage to embrace a future full of hope.